If you're a frequent watcher of my channel, you'll know that I am not a fan of Disney's live-action remakes. In fact, I would even go as far as to say that I think they're even worse than their direct-to-video sequels. Because while they were just inferior movies that could easily be ignored and never even hoped to be important enough to tarnish the original classics, with these live action remakes, they're going back and making changes to the actual iconic story that everybody loves. As if they're saying that there was something wrong with the original and now they're going to fix it. And needless to say, that mentality has only caused more and more people to start seeing right through these soulish cash grabs. To put it simply, I believe the live action remakes are nothing but a complete insult to not only the original classics they're remaking, but also the medium of animation in general. Because once again, the whole thing ends up implying that there's something wrong with animation that live action can inherently fix. Which is obviously completely untrue and backwards, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. The point is, I'm not a fan of the Disney live-action remakes at the best of times, but one remake that I think should not, in any way, be happening is the live-action remake of Moana. Like I said, I always hated these movies as a concept, but it was at the moment of that announcement that officially proved to me that Disney is taking all of this way too far. And today, I'd like to explain why I believe Moana in particular should not be subjected to having one of these remakes. And there will be spoilers for Moana, as well as a few other Disney movies ahead, so in case there's something you haven't seen yet but plan to, you should probably be on the lookout. Okay, so just as a quick side note first, I don't think I've been very fair to Moana on this channel. I even did a whole video on what I felt the movie would have looked like had it been helmed under Walt Disney, which you can find a link in the description to. And in most other videos I've brought it up in, I've usually put it in a more negative light as just another example of Disney becoming too mature and like Pixar. And the thing is, I actually like this movie. I'd even say that out of all the movies Disney has released since Frozen, Moana easily ranks as one of the best, and manages to feel a lot more like a Disney movie than most of the same era. I mean, it does have its problems, as I've gone over at length elsewhere, but on the whole, I'd say it's pretty good. But this is exactly where the issue of the whole live-action remake thing comes in. It doesn't need one. I mean, granted, you could say the same for every other Disney movie that's had a live-action remake, but the reason I'm saying this about Moana in particular is because of how recently it was released. It hasn't even gotten the chance to do anything yet, and they're already planning on remaking the story. They should have at the very least let the sequel, which they at least had enough sense to actually make, be released first. Because I'll be honest here, Moana is actually a pretty great main character for a Disney movie. Sure, she's a little abrasive or aggressive at times, but she's kind, compassionate, selfless, brave, and willing to admit when she's made a mistake or is out of her element. She is prime Disney princess material. I'll freely admit it, even if she wouldn't. And honestly, a lot of that comes from her voice actress's performance, whom I'm not saying the name of only because I don't want to completely botch it, which is why it's up on the screen right now. My point is, she's the one who made Moana as good of a character as she was. At least Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson will benefit from both movies. But just like with many other great vocal performers who had their animated stuff remade, She won't. And I don't think that's right. And that just spills into another issue that, as I touched on before, not only plagues Disney's remakes, but all remakes in general. That by remaking the movie in the first place, you're implying that there is something wrong with the original. And as I got into in another video, which you can also find a link in the description to, not only has that led to many good, or even great, movies being seen as inferior because their remakes were thought of as superior, but it also means that people will invariably draw comparisons between the two stories even when they have no business being compared to each other. I mean, it just so happens that in the case of the Disney live-action remakes, that these comparisons have only served to make the originals look better, and thus is arguably a service to them, but they still have caused many to spend hours debating over whether or not changes made in these remakes actually improve the story or not, even if the answer is almost invariably no. And there's also the issue that I brought up earlier, that Moana isn't a story that needs to be retold. Like I said before, it does have its problems. It's not perfect, but it's good enough that it doesn't need to have its flaws corrected. Moana isn't like Raya and the Last Dragon or Strange World that had an interesting concept that they completely dropped the ball with. The movie, for the most part, works, especially because, as I already noted, no actress they get will do better in the role than the one they already got. What I'm trying to say here is, just like all the other Disney live-action remakes, there is nothing a remake of Moana can do to improve the story, only take away from it. But the reason this is an even bigger problem than usual is because Moana came out in 2016, and the remake was announced in 2023, not even 10 years later. Even Tangled, at least, got to do everything they could do before they even thought about doing a live-action remake of it. Now, unlike Moana, nothing has been confirmed about Tangled, at least as of the making of this video, but I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that if Disney does do a live-action remake of Tangled, that'll be even worse, if for different reasons. Because Tangled is honestly perfect just the way it is, and there is nothing, I repeat, nothing a live-action remake can do to improve it. Sometimes you simply cannot make something that is perfect better. And it's about time that Disney and Hollywood in general learn that. Because, as I noted at the start, this whole phenomenon of converting animated stuff into live action and it being treated as such a big deal, it's like, by doing that, it implies that there is something inherently wrong with animation and that live action is automatically better. And as I already said, that simply isn't true. Especially considering these days hardly any films are all live action anymore. But the point is, live action, traditional animation, CGI, these are all different mediums, and sometimes what works in one simply does not work as well in another. Similar to how certain stories are better off being told in book format and others in a visual format such as movies or TV, some stories are just better suited to animation than live action, and that doesn't automatically make it inferior. Who Framed Roger Rabbit even fights against this very idea, saying that animation is worth a lot more than most give it credit for. And the people behind it clearly practiced what they preached, as the lengths they went to make the animated characters and props feel real and like they're existing right alongside the actors was not an easy thing. But they did it that way anyway because they had just as much respect for the animation side of the movie as they did the live action. They didn't treat one medium as inferior to the other, and even depicts a mentality like that as a bad thing. In other words, more people need to take the moral behind Who Framed Roger Rabbit to heart, because it's one worth saying. Now sure, the movie does focus mostly on the comedy side of animation and cartoons, but that is kind of to be expected considering the movie is a love letter to the golden age of animation, and almost all the animation of that period heavily focused on comedy. But that doesn't mean it also doesn't speak for the more serious side of animation as well, considering how serious the movie itself gets in places. To put it another way, in the movie, toons are treated as second-class citizens to the real-life people, but it also depicts that mentality as wrong. And the same lesson can be applied really well to how most people, both in and outside of Hollywood, view the animation industry in general as an inferior version of live action. And as I've just spent the last few minutes arguing, that simply isn't true. And Who Framed Roger Rabbit seems to be one of the only movies that seems to understand this, which is why I brought it up. Because it's arguing that animation has a lot of worth and deserves just as much respect as live action, whether it's made to be funny or dead serious. And as I said before, by making such a big deal of converting things people love in animation to live action, it only encourages the stereotype that there is something inherently wrong with animation. And announcing a live action remake of Moana is even worse because of how closely its announcement was to the release of the original movie, because it overall implies a major lack of respect for animation, as if they're saying, we'll test it out in animation, and if it's successful then we'll make it into a real movie and be able to capitalize on the fans of the animated one that it generated. And that's not the point of animated films, to be a test run for potential ideas. It is its own medium with a ton of worth, and deserves to be respected as such. But in the end, I guess it doesn't really matter. Whether or not Disney actually ends up releasing the live-action remake of Moana is their own call, and this video certainly isn't going to do anything to stop them. And if you happen to be watching this video after the remake comes out, and I turn out to be dead wrong about everything I said regarding it, you're most certainly free to call me out on it in the comments. I just wanted to make it crystal clear just how bad an idea I believe the whole thing is, and why Disney should not go ahead with it, even if it's not going to change anything. All I'm really saying here is, regardless of the lack of impact it'll have, I just hope I did say something worth saying with this video. Alright, I think it's about time I step down from my soapbox. And sorry if this video seemed a little all over the place. I just had a lot to say on this topic, and if it wasn't obvious enough, I'm pretty passionate when it comes to how much I hate the Disney remakes. But either way, now I'd like all of you to share your thoughts. Do you believe a live-action remake of Moana is a horrible idea? Or do you think it could actually be pretty good? Please let me know in the comments below. And let me please clarify that I am not promoting any hatred, nor do I hold any contempt for anybody who actually worked on the Disney live-action remakes. My only beef is with the movies themselves and the executives who allowed them to be made in the first place, not all the people who are forced to work on them. And please also note that you do not have to agree with anything I said in this video. I was only expressing my opinions, and you are just as entitled to what you feel as I do. So if you completely disagree with me about both Moana and its planned remake, that is absolutely fine. And thank you all for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.